As someone who studied and taught public speaking for over 50 years, I have some expertise in the subject. I admit that I have not spent much time on this podcast talking about public speaking, and that's something maybe I'll change in the future because oral communication is under attack and misunderstood in our culture and society today. But today I want to address one of the reasons I decided to retire, other than it was time. I didn't want to deal with generative artificial intelligence, and I especially didn't want to deal with it in the public speaking classroom because that has a whole different set of issues than in a writing classroom. Public speaking is the least appropriate place for generative AI, and generative AI has its least useful place in public rhetoric. I hope you'll listen in on my thoughts on this subject, and then I'm going to just kind of be the pundit and make some comments about other things that may or may not interest or enthrall you. They may make you angry. Everything I said in the introduction was real and not overstated. As tempting as it might be for someone who has to give a speech, and I'm putting that in air quotes, as tempting it is for them to go to Claude or ChatGPT and put in the prompts and get some text to inflict on the audience, that is a temptation you should resist with all your strength if you are finding yourself in a position where you have to give a speech or public presentation of some sort. So let's see why. First, I say it because I am so opposed to generative AI, period. It's ethically problematic, environmentally devastating, and let me think. GAI, generative AI, always writes things in threes. Check it out. You'll find multiple examples of sentences in any one paragraph of expositional writing that has it in threes. Or don't, because you would have to feed the beast to do so. And I almost never tell anyone to go to generative AI because to me it's just feeding the animal that's going to suck everything out of our creativity and our cognitive abilities and our jobs and everything else. Although I think the jobs issue is that's long down the pike. It's already happened. But in that previous sentence, I couldn't come up with a parallel third reason. So I'll skip the parallelism and say that GAI is for lazy and uncreative people, especially when it comes to writing words that are for public speaking situations. It's also, as I said, feeding the beast, training itself to use your ideas to help some technology capitalists make more money. Not that I'm against capitalism, so there's a cognitive dissonance problem for me. I'm against laziness and people not using their brains, and against material that's been created by real writers being stolen. And if capitalists do that to us, it's on them. Generative AI has been proven by experimentation, even that done by computer scientists, to cause brain degeneration. Our dependence of technology in general is doing that, as all kinds of research show. Parents who really care about their children's education have woken up to how bad tablets and screens are for critical thinking and reading and math. I have earlier recommended The Digital Delusion by Derek Cooney Horvath, a Harvard professor, who makes the case that digital instruction has ruined the educational skills of a generation. And I really do recommend that book. I was already on his side, but it pressed me to the next level, and it really changed how I approach teaching if I were to go back into it, and my allowance of my grandchild to use a screen. My antipathy for generative AI is very real, but there's a lot more. And that's where I want to get into it, that it's not just about my attitudes. Public speaking is the most immediate form of planned communication. Now, I want you to think about that. I'm going to say it again. Public speaking is the most immediate form of planned communication. It is you and the audience with nothing between. In a sense, there is no net. You can speak from a script, which can be generated by a chat GPT bot. Wonderful. And you will waste the time of the people who have come to hear you speak or have been forced to listen to you for a paycheck, because you will not have anything of your own to say, not even the original ideas. Harsh? Yes. But I speak from over 50 years of studying public speaking and teaching it. I know a few things. And I want to start mostly with that relationship between the audience and the speaker, which I think most views of public speaking take for granted or overlook. People in an audience want certain things. They want authenticity. They want relevance. They want something of value or information they can use. And I would add they want immediacy, something that is going on in the minute, something that's not scripted. Now let me back up on these. One aspect of public speaking, of course, and if you've studied anything in this realm, you know there's ethos, logos, and pathos, and then there's also mythos, which is an interesting one. Is credibility, ethos, which they're not exactly the same thing, but we'll not get into the weeds on that one. Credibility is the audience's perception of the speaker and how that perception influences them and influences how they listen, how they perceive, and how they respond to the message. Authenticity is supposed to be about being your true self. And of course, many public speakers are not their true selves. And so that would be the first thing. I believe an audience wants authenticity. They want to know that the person speaking is speaking from their own honesty and integrity. But sometimes that doesn't happen. It's a goal. Just because some people don't meet the goal doesn't mean that we should get rid of the goal. So authenticity means that you're speaking what you believe. It's real. It is your thoughts, your words, your convictions. Relevance means that what you have to say has something to do with the current audience and the current state that the audience is in. It's not about something from 20 years before. It's about something that they need or could face now. Now, that may seem to be the same thing as something of value or information they can use, but there is a slight difference. For one thing, for it to be of value, it needs to be credible, it needs to be from good sources, it needs to be researched, it needs to be backed up. And that's when we get into citing your sources or what sources you use, etc., and how you use them. This is one thing in my later years of teaching public speaking that I became much more focused on, and that was getting my students to really clearly cite their sources. It's one thing to just sort of say, well, according to a website, blah, 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 but I train them to do much more in depth, to talk about who the author was, the actual sponsor of the website, the date of the article, and I also wanted them to use scholarly sources from the database of the college, something that some of them balked at, but later some of them said, boy, that was something I really got out of this class. We called it Galileo, but other places have another name for what the database is. So, authenticity, relevance, and something of value or information they can use. And so the fourth one I said was immediacy. And by that I mean they want to be talked to, not have words thrown at them. They don't want a script. I realize that most people today do speak from scripts or teleprompters because at least the people that we hear on television, politicians, government leaders, they are under the pressure of saying exactly what needs to be said. They can't go off script. Now, our president is very popular or very well known. I shouldn't say popular, but well known for going off script. And sometimes it gets him in trouble. Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's even clever. But he doesn't like to be on a script too long, and only does it when it's he knows he has to. It's something of great importance. Being scripted is and reading from a script is really a no-no in public speaking because it limits that immediacy of eye contact and being able to get away from the lectern and walking around and actually talking to people. Stephen A. Lucas, who wrote the most used public speaking book in the last 25 to 30 years, said that public speaking is enlarged conversation. While I don't agree with that 100%, and I'll say why in a minute, as enlarged conversation, the amount of scriptedness, i.e. reading from a script, should be diminished as much as possible. The goal is to talk to people. Now, the reason I don't totally buy the conversation is that gives the impression that it's an audience response. The audience, you ask them questions, they have to go back and forth. And I generally discourage that. And the reason for it is a lot of times, especially in smaller groups, people think they have the right to interrupt the speaker. And that's usually not done in good faith. It's done by people who want to argue, people who want attention, people who aren't listening. And it also wastes everyone else's time in the group, although sometimes the question may be a question others have. And it may be, it will probably get the speaker off track and use up his or her time that they've planned. Because one thing I always emphasized was the time limit is sacrosanct. If you're given 5 minutes, that's what you're given. You don't take 10. So to get around that enlarged conversation issue, I would say that as you prepare it, you need to think of it as an enlarged conversation and think, okay, if I bring up this subject, what are the questions they are going to have that I need to address immediately so they're not tempted to interrupt, or they're not, even worse, sitting there in the dark because they don't know the main things. And so if you think of it ahead of time as how people are going to respond and what they're going to be thinking, you can approximate that idea of enlarged conversation without being constantly interrupted, which you don't want. So that's why for many years when I taught public speaking, and I got away from it at the end, but I always brought it up, was that the best speeches are the ones that answer the questions in the minds of the audience. And I still hold to that if you're not answering their questions, what are you doing up there? You have to address where their brains are. And that takes audience analysis. It takes knowing your audience. It takes some reflection, something that ChatGPT is not really well known for. So the whole point is that the goal is to talk to people, not inflict words on them. In teaching public speaking, we do not really traditionally use scripts. That's one thing that I taught a lot. It's how to do a good outline. And a good outline has about 40% of the actual words that you would say, but it is extemporaneous. It gives you freedom. Not 40%, you can go a little more than that, but there is a strict numbering and indentation system because it shows you what's the most important. Things that are on the left side of the page are the things you don't want to miss. Those are the main ideas. The further things go, the more you can, you're either getting into the weeds or getting into specifics, and you might want to really think about it. So if you get an outline that has parentheses with double letters like AA, you've gotten really, really, really very specific, and that's not good because the audience is not going to get that. That's you, which brings me to the whole point is that public speaking is not writing. They're two different media, and you don't want to overdo. You want to keep it simple, not stupid, not dumbed down, but you want to keep it simple so that people can follow you. Structure, etc., is and keeping to main ideas that people can digest in an oral environment, because we're just not good listeners anymore, if we ever were. So along with authenticity and relevance and value and immediacy, a speech should have a clear underlying structure. As I said, when I taught public speaking, I was huge on structure. That means the good old beginning, middle, and end. That means the middle needs clarity, limited main points. I suggest 3 or 4, 5 at the most. That's really pushing it. And then a lot of preview and summary and transitions between your main and even subordinate points. These sound like things the audience would do, but they need to be done with the audience that you know in mind. And see, this is my whole point, that the AI doesn't know your audience. You can put in information about who they are and how old they are and what job they're doing and the context and all that. You can do that and you'll get some good stuff. I'm not saying you won't get any good stuff. And it might be some things that you can use to kind of get you started. I think that AI's best purpose is brainstorming, not actually creating your own drafts. But even with an audience, the way you're going to transition has to come from the audience. For example, a lot of people use transitions, they use questions. And that's kind of, it gets old. Says, so if that's true, what happens next? That kind of thing. So you want to vary your transitions. The audience wants this clarity. Brene Brown has a wonderful quote. She says, clarity is kind. I love that. More than they want beautiful language, which AI can give you, I suppose, they want clarity. They want clarity. They want structure. They want to be able to walk away, being able to remember what was said and not being lost in the words. I would say that maybe AI can give you beautiful words. It is getting better, of course, but it may be beautiful words that say little in many cases. Now, at this point, I want to get concrete and give you an example. I belonged to Toastmasters for about 4 years. I started, unfortunately, at the time of right before COVID started, and that's never good. And so that sort of influenced my experience because we had to do it online. I don't believe in that. The whole point of Toastmasters is the immediacy and the fellowship of it, and the actual giving speeches to real people in the room and bodies. But I recommend Toastmasters. I think it's a wonderful organization, and in its basic mission and what it's trying to do in the materials they have. I may have some issues with some of the way they run things, but that's just me. I think it's a great organization, especially if you did not have any speech training when you were in college or high school. But I recently went to a meeting. I sometimes go just see my friends. And one of the speakers spoke from his heart about something he knew well about professionally, and he made it practical for the audience. This man really knows his stuff about this field. It was a technological thing, which a lot of people do know technology, but they just know enough to be dangerous or to get by. And so he had added value. Now, this gentleman went too long. He had some bad grammar, and he didn't have an introduction that was particularly clever. He also had a tendency to rock. So was it a good speech? Well, in Toastmasters, just like in education, we work for improvement. As much as I hate to say this, sometimes a well-crafted and well-delivered speech is a dead one because it has no heart, no concern for the audience, and no organic growth for the actual speaker. It does not create connection. A speech has to work first with connection, and AI has nothing to do with connection. This gentleman's speech had a lot of good things in it, and it connected with us, and we appreciated it. I still remember it, and I have listened to a lot of speeches in my life. I used to teach public speaking with a basic diagram, okay, and I'm not an artist, so this was, it was not much of an artwork, but think of three elements converging like a river, although with different varied strength perhaps. And these elements converge like a river into the main idea, or what's called the big idea, the key message that needs to be delivered, and that would be sayable in one sentence. Those three elements are the speaker, the audience, and the context. You can't take one of them out. AI doesn't know you, and you are the organ, you are the vehicle of the speech. It has to come from you. The audience, the receivers, have to be considered in every way. And the context, whether it's the amount of time you have or the physical limitations or why you were asked to speak, you can't take one of these out. Yes, you can put in information about the audience to the chat GTP and you can refine the prompt. You can get it to give you an outline, a script, and stories. But they won't be your stories. They won't be your ideas. They cannot create the relationship with the audience. I would also say, beyond the brainstorming aspect of it, AI is also useful for research. I'll give you that. But where does the research come from? Do you know? Did you know that AI scrapes real people's work for free without paying anyone unless you get sued and your name is Anthropic? And they get it mostly from Wikipedia and media sources that have scary amounts of bias. Now, I'm not going to act like I have never used AI at all, especially now that if you Google something, it immediately gives you an AI overview. My eyes, of course, pass over that. But if I'm trying to research something that matters, medical conditions, material for a book I'm writing, or a podcast, I pretty much say, and go on and keep scrolling to find sources I know are unbiased, or at least freer of bias, and that are going to get into more specifics. It's just like Wikipedia. Everybody goes to Wikipedia, but even Wikipedia has bias, and it's only going to give you certain kinds of information. And so, at this point, I would have to ask about public speaking. If you're tasked with giving a speech, why can't you put together your own message for these people? That would be my question. What's holding you back? Have you not studied public speaking? Maybe you do need a class. Maybe you do need to read some books, and maybe you do need to try something like Toastmasters and get some more professional training in that. Are you allowing yourself to go to ChatGTP or Generative AI just to save time? What I want to say is when you get in a situation where you are delivering an oral message to other people, they deserve something worthwhile. They deserve you. So that's my message for the day, and I'm going to bring up a couple of other things. First thing I'm going to bring up is something that's really disturbing me, and maybe I shouldn't go here, but I'm going to, and that is anti-Semitism. I don't understand it, and it's something that I'm hearing and I listen to a lot. And our Jewish friends are really under a lot of attack right now. And I think that all of us need to be aware of where this is coming from. This is not coming from necessarily right-wingers all the time, although some of it is. It's coming from the left. It's coming from the sometimes the critical studies and critical theory and the idea of intersectionality and privilege, and the idea that the Jews are privileged because they're white and they have colonized and the genocide and everything like that. Now, this is not to say that everything that Israel does is pristine. They are a country, they are fighting for their survival. But it is clear to me that what's going on now in terms of the support for anti-Semitism from politicians, podcasters, media folks is really, really scary and perhaps dangerous and not necessarily as safe as people think. You know, just remember the old, I believe it was Niemöller, they came for a certain group and I didn't care because it wasn't me, et cetera, and then when they came for me, no one was left. Now, as someone who was always in the middle of evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity, we were just taught from day one that anti-Semitism is horrible, and you know that's been ground into me, and I've never understood what the issue was, except that it has to be pure otherism, pure prejudice and hatred towards the other, someone who is different. But hey, I'm different. Everybody's different, and we cannot take comfort in that. So I really, that's just something I've wanted to talk about. If you have a tendency to listen to those who blame the Jews or talk about the Jews or have whiffs of anti-Semitism, and you listen to podcasts, etc., like that, I really, really encourage you to step back and ask yourself what's going on and really get the facts about Israel, about America's support for Israel, and other things. I was disturbed recently when a former student posted some things about the Republican Party, about which he'd been very supportive and things like that, and said that he was disturbed by the party's support for Ukraine and Israel. And I'm like, what? Of course we support Ukraine and Israel. Ukraine is fighting Putin. Israel is being attacked. And I think that we see the price of gas and respond like a child. I don't like paying this much for gas, but there's more going on than just the price of gas. That said, I would like the war in Iran to be over, and definitely would like the Ukrainian war to be over. My church has a number of Ukrainian people, very kind, sweet people, who have immigrated here, and they're a big part of our church, and I want them to be able to know that their country is safe. Another thing I wanted to bring up was dogs. I have had in my adult life 5 dogs. The first one was Queen. She was not so much a rescue. She was given to us by my brother-in-law and my mother-in-law. I'm not sure how we got her, but she was a chow. And I don't recommend chows. Well, she was a good enough dog. We eventually gave her to my mother, so she got sent around the family because my mother had a fenced yard, and that's where she lived. Chows especially, it's like the kind of dogs that live, Alaskan Huskies, too much hair for the South. Okay, so that's not something that you really want to do. Then we didn't have a dog for a long time, and in 2011 we adopted Buddy from a local shelter. Buddy was a little dog. We let him get too fat, and because of that he had some problems with his hips, and he had to be put down, which was very sad. It was the first time I ever put a dog down, and I was surprised by how much it affected me. It also was, interestingly, that the way he was put down, I think the vet was kind of unkind. He got the shot and he was dead. There was no easing into death at all, which was different with another experience. Then when my mother died, we got her dog Bumper, who was not a good dog, and we gave him away to someone. And after Buddy, my husband was convinced by some neighbors that he needed to take care of a dog named Nala. Nala was a pit mix, very sweet dog, but sometimes a little unpredictable, and I never felt entirely safe with her, despite our closeness around other people and children. And she was a beautiful dog, and I could tell lots of stories about Nala, but we had to put her down back in November of 25. And I was not ready for that, but she was 15 years old. And I do have to say that time, the vet, it was the same practice, but a different professional, they gave us 10 minutes where they gave her a shot to help her relax, but she knew we were still there, and then they carried her off to finish the deed. And that was much better. And then they sent me a nice card, and we have a little area on the counter for her. She was a great dog. As my son said, she had an opinion about everything, and she was a very funny dog, and she was afraid of cats and loved to stalk rabbits, and I'm not one of those people who think that dogs will be in heaven and that kind of thing, but if they are, I think she'll be there. And that brings me to my current dog, which is Butter. I got Butter 4 years ago from the Whitfield County private shelter. And Butter's biggest problem is he sheds too much. And he's not the brightest dog that ever lived, but he's very good natured. And he owns my house. And the other day, there was a snake in my backyard, as I call it. And Butter was having an encounter with the snake, but it was a king snake and it wasn't going to hurt him and he wasn't going to hurt it. So as much as I hate snakes, I was able to stand there and watch this interesting little encounter between Butter and the snake. But as much as dogs are part of my life, and I'm a total dog person, not a cat person, sorry, what really is the center of my life is being a grandma, or as my granddaughter calls me, Waga. Don't know where Waga came from, but there it is, Waga. It may be some mashup from Spanish and English, I don't know. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be the grandmother to this sweet, crazy child who is now 2 and 4 months old. And she comes up with some beautiful saying every day, some beautiful piece of wisdom. She loves her school. She loves other children. She loves to play. She loves to imitate her parents in kind of funny ways. She has a strong will. The other day she saw a little lizard in the yard and she called him an alligator, or actually an agalator. And we're still working on her to understand lizard versus what an alligator really is. Then we had so many other words where she gets things wrong. A worm is a snake or a nake. And I'm sure almost all parents and grandparents can think about that. Now, I only had one child, and right now I just have one grandchild. So I feel like I'm reliving raising a child. And, at 2, I think we sometimes have, because she's bright, we have too many expectations. The famous verse in Proverbs to raise up a child in the way they should go. And there's been a lot of debate over that, but I believe that it means according to who they are, that you don't push them in ways to be something that they're not. Obviously, they have to be obedient. They have to be taught what is right and wrong, and taught most of all that they are God's children, and they're loved. But our pastor spoke last week on Colossians 3:21. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they be discouraged. And I think one way we do that is by trying to get them to be something they're not. Now, does she have tantrums? Yes. I've only had to deal with her once with it. And my approach is just distract her. Don't let them go on, remove them, and get them to look at something else. And that may not be the best, but you cannot reason with a 2-year-old. Give me a break. So, this podcast is coming up on its 100th episode. This may be the 100th episode. I haven't counted. 77 different people have been on my podcast. So what have I learned? Well, that there's no end to great people to interview. Sometimes I think, I can't do this anymore. I'm running out of people. And then I meet a whole bunch of great people. But it does take some time, and it does take some money. And I would appreciate any help in that, and that you would bear with the advertisements that might be on the program. I have recently signed up to go on a trip to Greece with my church in November. And that has led me that I'm going to do a whole podcast on Turkey, my trip I took last year, and we'll do some more on that. Some of the podcasts coming up will be solos, and some will be interviews. We'll be speaking with Linda Gamble today, and that'll be on sometime in the next few weeks. We will be having Daryl Thetford soon, and I have some former colleagues who are experts in certain things that we're going to talk to. So I think you'll enjoy what's coming up. I might take a break in July and come back, but I am committed for the rest of the year. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. It's always a pleasure. Bye-bye.